Hey, sports ballers. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Learn Sports Ball Show. My name is Austin Goss, and today is the last day you'll know nothing about youth sports.
Here we go.
So today was my son's 10th birthday, my oldest son, Carter, and it was a really sweet time that we got to spend with him, especially this afternoon after he got home. He's had some stuff going on. Kids around here don't go to school on Fridays, so he was off for part of the day, but he's participating in a kind of traveling children's theater that happens once a year in our area. And so he was going to that and then participating, had his first show today. Super excited to get through that. While he was there, I was in the backyard with my youngest son building a basketball hoop, and he was really, really excited about it. We got some video of it. He was just super pumped. And one of those things that just reminds me how much sports impacted me at a young age and how much sports impact him at a young age. And it hit me as I was watching him go outside, play with his new basketball hoop, just practice, try to get better at something that I know he really has worked hard at to improve on already. It hit me that we should be talking about youth sports. When we talk about learning about sports ball in general, that starts for a lot of kids at a young age. That started for me certainly at a young age. And I think it's really important that we look at it, not just from the perspective of a child and what they stand to benefit from it, but also what we as parents stand to benefit from it. So if you're not a parent, if you don't have kids that are going to be in sports and you maybe don't have that in your future, I'd encourage you to stick through this anyway, because I think some of the conversation is going to be a crossover discussion about things that you would still be able to benefit from even as an adult. And so hang with me, because this, I think, is going to be a super valuable discussion. And I'm going to start with just a little bit of my own personal experience. So I played a lot of sports when I was really young. I tried pretty much every sport that was available to me: basketball, football, soccer, anything that I could really play with my friends and go out there and have fun doing. I did. My favorite sport was baseball. It was the one that I was most naturally inclined for. I just picked it up fairly easily. It was a game that I understood and had the athletic ability to play. Basketball and football were tough for me when I was really young, simply because I was a small kid. If you know me personally, I'm actually a bigger guy now. That wasn't always the case. I was usually one of the smaller kids growing up, and that was true up until about high school, well after the time that it would have been pretty crucial for me to decide what sports I was going to play. So I stuck to baseball by and large because it was the one that really afforded me the best combination of natural circumstances. The game itself didn't require me to be the biggest kid on the field. It didn't require me to be the fastest or the most athletic, which I never really was that kid. But I could hold my own there. And so it's really the sport that I gravitated to. Basketball and football I loved, and I would have continued to play. I distinctly remember, as I think it was like a fourth grader, it might have been even a little bit later than that, but I remember hitting like a weight number, something around the range of like 60 pounds, I want to say. And once you hit a certain threshold, that meant that you were big enough by weight to go play with the bigger kids. And when we talk about the bigger kids in football at that stage in my life, like they were much, much bigger than me. And so I remember still getting out there and practicing, I think one time with the bigger kids, and then just deciding I can't do this, not because I didn't want to or not because I wasn't tough enough, but I just felt too little. I felt too small. I felt just incapable of keeping up with these kids. And so that's a transition into one of the major reasons I kind of wanted to talk about why youth sports matter in the first place, because it taught me something about myself and it helped me understand how to keep things in the proper perspective. So I'm going to outline three major reasons why I think that my foray into youth sports is something that all kids should experience in some way, shape, or form. And the first one mirrors something that we talked about in the original episode of this podcast when we were talking about why adults should get into sports in general. And that's the social aspect. But specifically with kids, I want to talk about the social development of those children. For me, one of the things that drew me to playing sports is that it's what my friends did. It was something that was a low sort of effort way to engage, and effort not meaning that you didn't try, but more low effort in the sense that lots of kids did it. It was easy to get into the sports. I didn't grow up in the world of like club sports and traveling leagues and all of these things where it just becomes so cumbersome for both the kid and the parent. I was playing in local leagues, nothing too competitive, nothing too crazy, but certainly allowed me to see my friends and also compete against them. And so I developed friendships over that time frame that I still have today. Some of those started when I was very young. Some of those started later in my youth athletic career, especially in high school, that kind of thing. But for the most part, I still have friends that I played baseball with when I was 10 years old. And so it's something that from a social development standpoint, it's really where you can start to form some pretty meaningful relationships and friendships that can actually stand the test of time. You also get the chance to interact with kids that maybe otherwise you wouldn't, whether it's socioeconomic status, whether it's they look different or they live too far away or whatever. All the kind of social weird reasons that kids can avoid each other or can kind of start to develop their own groups or, positions in life, I guess, as you would say it. Those are all things that kind of get broken down when you're playing sports. Everybody's on an equal playing field in the sense that, I guess, pun intended there, in the sense that they're able to just go out there and compete. And if you can play, you can play. If you can't, you can't. But there's this sort of mutual respect and understanding that everybody's out there to try and to have fun and to work hard at something that's just genuinely enjoyable to do. So when you get the chance to develop in the sense that you're interacting with kids that maybe otherwise you wouldn't, I think that's really crucial for forming healthy adults out of the children that are playing in these leagues. It also gives you an opportunity to really dive into maybe your first tastes of things like empathy and compassion and frustration and anger, all these different emotions and kind of human things that you can feel. You have to work through the highs and lows of the game with your team and with yourself. There's some mental fortitude that's required to play any kind of sport. And that mentality is not something that you simply just have. It's something that has to be developed over time. It's something that takes a lot of effort and energy to really pour into. And if you don't start that at an early age, it's really easy to put yourself in a mental state that just kind of separates you from your peers already, and not in a good way. Like it'll hold you back negatively because maybe you didn't have a chance to understand, what it was like to work through some of these things. What happens when you lose and how do you respond to that? How does your team respond to that? Where does your response impact your teammates and vice versa? All of those things are wrapped up into even the youngest leagues when the emotions are that much harder to control when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I know this has been true for me. This has been true for my son, that when you're first starting out, it's super difficult. Like it feels like you've let the world down if you didn't do something right. Or even if you made one very minor mistake in a game, you might go home and carry that around for the rest of the week because you feel like it was your fault. And while that mindset is not healthy, and I'm not advocating for saying, yes, you should carry around guilt and shame from the minor mistake that you made in your 7-year-old's soccer league, like no. But what I am saying is that as you work through that and as you get more experience feeling that, you start to put it in its proper place. You start to understand what winning and losing feels like, not just through your personal lens, but through the lens of the people you compete against too. So I think there's a lot of value in the social development that can happen with kids, especially when you have to start working through some of those complex emotions that come out of simple games. The other second piece that I would say is the personal growth and exploration that you can discover when you go through these things. One of the things that I found out early on is what I liked and what I didn't like. And that's, I think, super important to understand. If you don't try enough things, if you're not out there putting effort out to at least try, right? You're not going to know if you like it. You're not going to know if you dislike it. And so I really appreciated that my parents gave me the opportunity to compete in a lot of different sports because it helped me not just understand what I was naturally good at, but also what I just naturally enjoyed. One of the things that I think was so important for me about being able to do this is that I don't like things like standard exercise. I don't like to run. I don't like exercise for exercise's sake. But if you add a ball, if you add a sport into that mix, I'll play for hours without thinking about it. And it's partially because I enjoy it so much. And I understand and I respect the fact that not everybody's going to feel that way. But I would also challenge you, if you're a parent and you have kids that have never competed before, it might be worth letting them try it out, because whether or not they like it isn't necessarily the original point. If they can find that out for themselves, they can also learn something about themselves and say, hey, Mom and Dad, I don't really enjoy doing this and I don't want to keep doing it. I know I had some conversations with my parents around a lot of things that I started in sports world, where I played basketball and I said, hey, I didn't like sitting on the bench the entire game because I was too small in my coach's eyes, or I didn't like when I got run over by that kid that was 2 times my size in football. Those were lessons that allowed me to say, hey, I understand enough about myself, even as a very young kid, to say, I can't compete at this level yet. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. There's nothing wrong with learning that about yourself. And I think it helps keep you in a more humble kind of place. So learning what you like and dislike is a great way to or a great reason, I guess you could say, for understanding this. Similarly, learning about your own natural tendencies and inclinations. And this is subtly different than what you like and dislike, because I think we've all had that experience where what you are good at may not be something that you like. I'll pull an example from my personal life. I am really, really good at math. I don't necessarily like doing math. Like, it's not I didn't pursue a career path in that, although I do have some background now in like data analytics and things like that. But the things that I'm naturally good at are not always the things that I am drawn to and want to do. And so when you play a sport, you learn very quickly what your natural tendencies, your natural abilities are. And if you are not naturally inclined for something that you also don't like, well, it's a pretty clear indicator. Yeah, I'm just not going to play that. Golf is that game for me. I like golf a little bit. Like, I like the idea of golf, but the reality of golf for me, it's terrible. I have the worst swing in the world. That's probably from being a baseball player for a long time. It just doesn't translate well. And golf makes me like annoyingly angry, and I don't like feeling that way. I turn into a rage monster when I play the game. So I learned very early on, even as my dad, that was his favorite sport to play. He always wanted me to go golfing with him. And this goes back to that social development piece of like, I wanted to spend time with my dad because golf was one of the only places where he'd engage with me and really spend time with me. That got really deep really quickly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go that route, but it's true. He loved having me out on the golf course with him. I think just because it was a shared interest that he wanted me to have, but I sucked at golf and I didn't want to do it. And I didn't really like it. And ultimately I just had to stop because I was never going to get better at it, or I should rephrase that. I could have gotten better at it, but I was never going to put in the effort to get at least passably decent at that game. So I stopped. So learning about what you are naturally gifted for and then combining it with something that you actually like, that's a really powerful combination. And for me, that happened to be baseball. I was naturally gifted at it and I really liked playing it. So I picked it up and was able to learn about a lot about myself through that process. When that combination of liking something and being naturally inclined for it exists, then you're willing to put in the work that will make it pay off in the longer run. You're able to say, even if I'm not the best right now, or even if I'm not great at some aspect of this game yet, I want to try. I'm going to keep going after it because ultimately I like it. I love what I'm doing. I love the game that I'm playing and I'm naturally decent at it. So it's reasonable for me, even as a very young child or as in my adolescence, to say, if I keep working at it, I will get better. And one of the coolest things about every sport that I've ever played is if you are able to put in the work and if you like it and if you are naturally inclined, or even if maybe it's not your most natural inclination, when you put in that hard work, you almost get an immediate payoff in some sense because you get to see and reap the rewards of that in a practice, in a game. For example, as a pitcher, growing up, I loved to pitch. I loved to be on the mound. That was my favorite place to be. I don't have any particular reasons why, other than, again, it was one of those things that I liked and I was naturally pretty decent at. And I remember when I first when I first threw a curveball. Now, this is not advocating for, if you've got like 8 or 9-year-olds, please don't throw them out there on a pitching mound and have them start throwing curveballs at an early age. I've got a side note for that later on in this episode, but there's a lot of reasons why you should be mindful of what you're teaching your kids and how aggressively they're pursuing improvement in these sports, especially at age, because there is some injury risk, there is some developmental stunting, or just overall risk that can happen if you don't go about it the right way. But side note, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I remember the first time I threw a good curveball, and it was the first, it was one of those things that came pretty naturally for me. I played around with the grip of the baseball a little bit. I played around with just the way my arm felt when I threw it. And then I remember the first time I threw one that just, it broke like a curveball should. And if you're not in on baseball terms, break is just simply the amount that the ball moves on a pitch. And so generally speaking, the more movement, the better. And the curveball is exactly what it sounds like. You throw the ball so that it curves, like the path of the pitch curves as it approaches the plate. And it was not something that a lot of my peers could do at that age. The first really good curveballs that I threw, I was miles ahead of everybody else. And that was a good thing for me because I never had the most natural arm talent. But I continued to work on that curveball to supplement the fact that I never threw the hardest. I wasn't the most imposing kid. I wasn't out there striking people out just with the sheer velocity that I brought to the table. I never threw that hard. But my curveball, when it was going, was very good. And I was always so proud of the fact that I put the work in to learn a new pitch, to implement it, and then have the confidence to go out there and use it in games, in real life situations, and see those benefits pay off. So to tie back to that initial point, the hard work that I put in and the development that I saw was not just building on my likes and my natural inclinations, but it was also being able to see the payoff. I got that strikeout against that batter, and I could say, hey, that was a really good pitch. And I can think back to when I first threw a curveball to now and how much I've grown. So that personal growth is very very evident. That's the word I'm looking for when you're going through something like that. And I think finally, you have to adapt to different circumstances. Like even if you're really good at a game, even if you spend a lot of time practicing, you work hard, you enjoy it, all of those things, you're not always going to have your best day. You're not always going to have your best game. Your team might have a horrible game while you're having your best, or vice versa. And there's always going to be circumstances in which like things don't go the way you want them to. And I think that's really valuable, again, to learn at a very young age, because how many of us need to go through that, need to understand that life can be disappointing sometimes. Even when you work hard, that doesn't always guarantee a payoff. It might just not be your day. And so I think adapting to those different circumstances and being able to go through that is super, super valuable for kids. And this is something that Carter, my son, has gone through in spades. He is not the most athletically gifted child, or at least he wasn't when he was very young. And I always kind of wondered how that would impact his ability or willingness to go out and try. And what I have seen, especially over the last year or so, is he's really started to come into his own and develop into more of an athlete, develop into more of a player. He thinks through the games in different ways than other kids, but he's going through this path that I just described of, exploring his own personal growth and really figuring out who he is and what he can do, what he can't do, what his physical limitations are, what his, just kind of likes and inclinations are. And this has allowed him to develop some really unique friendships and interact with a lot of different kids in his school. And what I love about this is that it's not so much about the athletic growth at this stage in the game. Like, I love that he's getting better at games that he loves to play, and he's actually enjoying it more because he's more competitive in these sports. But he's also formed these valuable relationships, and he has served as such an encouragement to the kids around him. He always tells people, good game. He's always looking outward to see not just how he feels about it, but how are his teammates responding to a win, a loss? How is the other team responding? And it's just like super heartwarming as a dad to see that happening in real time and watching my son mature in large part because he is committed to trying these things. So that personal growth, I think, is a super valuable aspect of this that you can't overlook. And parents, if your kids have never participated in sports, it's not too late. And if you never participated in sports, that doesn't mean they can't or won't. So it might be a conversation to have if you have older kids, or it might just be something you sign them up for if they're young enough, and see where it goes. Ultimately, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and that's okay. But being able to teach your kids something about themselves and watch them learn that has been one of the most enjoyable things for me as a parent. The final major point I want to talk about with youth sports is this idea of competition. And I know this might be a little bit controversial. Maybe it's not, but I think that competing at its core always tells us something valuable about ourselves and about other people. And I don't mean competition in the way that you're constantly comparing yourself to other people and that your worth is somehow tied to the outcome of a game. Please do not hear me saying that. Competition is really healthy in the right ways, in the right formats, and with the proper perspective. But if you don't have those things happening, competition can be really toxic really quickly. So what I'm referring to is that good, healthy competition where two teams are trying hard, where everybody's giving it their best effort, where it's not too combative, all of those things. And it's not meant to be the defining aspect of who you are as a person. It's just meant to benchmark how are you doing athletically. And I think there's some value in going through that. Going up against other people is a meaningful benchmark, and it can help you understand, is this something maybe I want to continue to put effort into? Maybe you do like the sport and you were at one point naturally inclined, but now as you go out and compete, you realize that other kids are getting bigger, stronger, faster, or they're just getting better at a pace that you're not keeping up with. And now you're faced with this decision point of, do I continue down this path? Do I continue competing? Do I continue trying? Or do I just let it go for right now? Do I decide, you know what, I don't think I'm going to be able to put in the time, the energy, the effort, or maybe I just don't care about this sport as much as I used to? Competition can inform that very quickly for you. And it can become very apparent if you are the odd man out in these situations. And again, I think there's a lot of value in learning that from a humility perspective for individuals, especially younger kids. If you are constantly of the mindset that you are the best, and then someone goes out there and beats you handily and then does it again and again and again, at a certain point, you develop some humility to say, you know what, I'm not the best at this, and I have a lot of experience to tell me that. And again, this isn't an effort in beating kids down. It's an effort of learning what I think is an underrated life skill in general, which is having the humility to approach everything you do with the understanding that there's always someone better at it. There's always room to improve. There's always ways to grow. And you can respond in several ways when you're competing with people. You can put in the work. You can work to develop and grow and get better. You can acknowledge, I'm not naturally inclined, and I'm also not going to put in the work to get to the same level that these people are. Or you can just decide, you know, this isn't for me. It's clearly I'm out of my league, right? So all of those things are really important. One of the other things I love about competition is it forces you to learn things like empathy and sportsmanship. Winning or losing, you're going to see both sides of that. If you win, yeah, that feels great, but you also see people on the other side of that aren't feeling so good. And when you're younger, I think empathy comes more naturally to younger kids. I think it's a harder thing as an adult to practice consistently and empathizing with people because we get so caught up in our own lives. But I feel like kids are pretty good at looking out and seeing what other people are experiencing and feeling that and going through what they're going through. So when you win or you lose, you're forced into this mode of expressing some kind of empathy. And that's what we commonly refer to as sportsmanship. Sportsmanship is simply treating the other people with respect and understanding you've been in their shoes, win, lose, tie, or whatever. All of those things, again, I don't think there's any of us that would argue for kids. That's a super important thing to learn. So the empathy and the sportsmanship that you have to develop, it's a hard thing to get your head around as a kid, because when you lose, you're angry, you're upset, you're emotional, and you see the other team celebrating and enjoying that, and you're feeling all of those feelings, and you have to go out there and shake their hand, and sometimes you're going to give them a harder high five than you would other times because you're really mad about that particular loss or whatever. But again, I think it's a really valuable thing to learn for kids. And finally, just going back to that hard work reward, if you compete at I shouldn't even say the highest level because we're talking about youth sports, but when you compete in these things, if you go out and let's say you win the championship for your town, you get to carry that around for the next year. You get to feel good about the fact that your team came out on top, and vice versa. If you don't win that championship, or if you aren't one of the best teams out there, you're faced with that same discussion we talked about before. Okay, how do I get better? How do I improve? What's going to make a difference here? So hopefully those are some compelling reasons to kind of think about this for your kids. Now, if you are a parent like I am, and you're not a youth that's going to go compete in these sports, I mean, I suspect there's not a lot of 8-year-olds listening to this podcast out there. If you are, hello, glad you're here. But this is mostly a discussion that's targeted at parents of kids that could be in sports. So let's talk about it from a parenting perspective. What's in it for you? The positives, same things I've already talked about. Watching your kids go through this process and develop and grow and learn new skills has been really rewarding. Watching them have to adapt to other adults. I think this is another thing that's a big sort of indicator of how successful a kid could be in the future. How do they interact with people that aren't their parents? What kind of respect do they give them? Do they give them the attention they deserve? And I'm talking about like coaches, that kind of thing. Are they actively engaged? Are they listening? Are they part of that conversation? Helping them understand that for you as a parent will also help you see that through the lens of how can I also develop those types of relationships? How can I get to know this coach who's investing so much time and effort and energy into my kid? So there's definitely some value in helping your kids understand the respect for your elders, if you will, but that's not really what I'm referring to. It's more about just being able to have healthy relationships with other adults. So especially coaches. I mean, that coach relationship is in so many ways, critical for a kid. And I think about how coaches sometimes were a substitute for my own father, and like not in the healthiest ways. I don't want to say that like, hey, dads, don't show up to your kids' games because their coaches are their dads. That's not what I mean at all. But I do remember very distinctly, my dad wasn't super involved in my sporting career. It wasn't really a career. Again, it was all as a kid and a teenager. But the point being that when I had these coaches that invested the time and effort and energy into me, it gave me a deeper respect for my own parents. So if you're looking at it as a parent saying, well, what's in it for me? They might develop a deeper respect for who you are and what you do by virtue of having to interact with coaches, some that they like, some that they may not like, and some that may be pretty effective at what they do and some not so effective. Again, watching your kids just do something they enjoy. I think all of us as parents love that. You love that feeling of them going out and just having fun, and you can see the joy in their faces when they play. That in and of itself is enough of a reward. What are some of the drawbacks? I mean, the logistics are kind of challenging. At this point in my life, I've got 3 kids, a 4th on the way, full-time job. I'm doing this now with the Learn Sports Ball stuff. It's challenging to get your kids to and from practices sometimes and having a game each week. Right now, Carter's in football season, and so he's got twice a week practices and games every Saturday morning for quite a few weeks. And it certainly is not always the easiest thing, but this is where I would say for you as a parent, this is one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable lessons that I learned as a child that I am now applying as a parent. You have to show up. It doesn't matter how inconvenient it is. It doesn't matter how tired you are. Like, be there for your kids. I had so many times as a kid growing up when I would go out and play my baseball games, or I'd be practicing for that basketball game that I was really excited to be a part of. And then I'd be searching the sidelines and I almost never saw my own dad there. And I don't want this episode to turn into some lambasting of my father or some kind of therapy session. That's not the point. But the point is to say, I still remember so vividly how I felt when that happened, to just know my dad's not here for me right now. So in his case, the what's in it for him, he didn't really get to experience that aspect of it. Just like my willingness to engage him in relationship was in some ways impacted by the fact that he just couldn't bother to show up for my games. And I wasn't looking for enthusiastic, cheering on the sidelines, jumping up and down, rooting me on at every turn. I just wanted to know that he was there. So while it may be a drawback for your personal schedule and you might feel too busy, or you might feel like this is too much to do, please, 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 even if you do that, if you sign your kids up and if they're excited to play, go out there and support them. Even if that means you roll out of bed 5 minutes before the game starts, you sit there and you're grumpy the whole time. I suspect that as you watch, you're going to develop and kind of start feeling some of the joy that they have. And it's going to be reciprocated through the way that you interact with them through that game. And the other thing that's in it for you is you get to build up your kids through this process. You get to help them through that social development and that personal growth we already talked about. I've had so many meaningful conversations with Carter that have stemmed from difficult losses or great wins, where we can reinforce, hey, here are the things that you did really well. Here are the things that you could improve on. But buddy, I'm so proud of you either way. I'm proud of how you treated the team, even when you lost. I'm proud of how you kept your head up and said good game to the other team, even when it didn't go your way. Or I'm really proud of how you congratulated all of your teammates when things did go well. And I'm really proud of how you competed and performed in these particular aspects in the game. It gives you the opportunity to develop a richer and deeper relationship with your kids and provides a natural gateway and openness to talk about it, because your kids want that feedback. Carter has always been that way. He wants feedback from me about how things went. And because I know enough about sports, I can coach him while also deepening my relationship with my son. So there's a lot of really good reasons why you as a parent should also be involved in this, because ultimately it's reciprocal, and the growth of your kids, the development of them through this process is a really sweet thing. Really, really sweet. So hopefully I've made a pretty decent case for why youth sports matter, how they can impact your kids, how they can impact you and your own relationship with your kids. Now let's talk about a couple healthy guardrails. First of all, I know we live in an era and a world of youth sports where, especially as you get a little bit older into like middle school and especially high school, they become fixations, not just for your kids, but they can become fixations for the coaches and for the people that kind of support them through these events. Keep everything in balance. And I know that might be hard, that might be difficult, but I remember as a kid, like especially in high school, I didn't have practice every day. I didn't spend every minute of my summer preparing for the next season of whatever sport it was. I still got to go out and live a normal life. I never competed in like club baseball. I didn't travel around to all these things. I just competed with my high school team on the standard schedule that we had. I know that things have changed in 2024, are a lot different than they were 20 years ago when I was playing high school sports, but I still think it's important that you find a healthy balance to this. Speaking from personal experience, you also need to be really careful about keeping your kids healthy. One of the things that I just didn't know because I was young and dumb is that you can hurt yourself pretty badly if you overuse, let's say, your pitching arm. So when I was a junior in high school, I was actually, let me rephrase. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was still technically young enough to pitch in Little League. So what happened was my sophomore year, I pitched a lot of games for my high school team. I want to say somewhere around like 15 to 20 of the 35 games that we had in that season, I pitched at least one inning or part of that game. That's a lot of use for a pitcher, and pitching is really hard on arms because ultimately our arms are not meant to do that kind of motion so repetitively at throwing a baseball. It's just not how we're naturally like biometrically wired and anatomically set up. It's not the safest thing inherently, even if you're the healthiest and really careful about it. But in high school, a sophomore year, I pitched all these innings, and then because I was still young enough, I also competed in Little League. And lo and behold, I got into Little League, and being young and dumb, I thought, well, I'm just going to keep pitching because nobody's telling me no. So I told my coach when I got there, hey, I love to pitch. I pitch for my high school team. I'll pitch here. And that's what they had me do. I got to the end of the season for Little League and I felt some shoulder discomfort, but being young enough and kind of naive, I just wrote it off as like, yeah, my arm's probably tired. I've been doing this a lot. I just need some rest. And at this point, it had been probably, 4 or 5 straight months of baseball. So I was definitely overdue for just some time to not have to do this. Well, I got to my junior year tryouts for my high school team. And I remember still, I was in the outfield. I fielded a fly ball. And as I went to throw the ball into the infield, my entire arm went numb. As soon as I released it, from my shoulder down to my fingertips was just numb. And I knew in that exact moment in time, there was something seriously wrong with my arm. And I didn't want to admit it because it was tryouts. The season hadn't even started yet. And I already knew that there was something going on. Fast forward, however long it was, got an MRI done, confirmed that I had torn my rotator cuff, most likely from overuse from when I was a 15-year-old sophomore and just pitching way too many innings. Ended up having to have surgery, had to miss a lot of, I played through it my junior year. So I ended up having to switch to, I didn't get to pitch anymore. That was the end of my pitching career because I had hurt my shoulder bad enough that the rehab for torn rotator cuff, having that surgery, going through physical therapy, I blasted through it in about 6 months, but I still am not 100% the same even after all of that. I can't throw a baseball like I used to because ultimately I still have some of that pain and that discomfort. And some of that's probably just age. Some of that may be arthritic in nature. I don't want to put everything into that basket and say it's simply because I tore my rotator cuff, but it absolutely sabotaged the rest of my pitching career because by the time I really felt like I could throw meaningfully again, I was a senior. It was my last year. And that was really the only year I had left. So I didn't focus too much on how things were going to end up because I knew I wasn't going to play college ball or anything like that. I say all of this to say, I did not have people in my life telling me you cannot pitch this much. And this was probably before it was really understood that scientifically this shouldn't be happening. But there were certainly pitch counts and kind of some guardrails that were loosely adhered to. So please, if you are in a sport, if your kids are in a sport, please don't just trust the coach's judgment on that. Please don't just let them do whatever they want. Be mindful of their health. Do some research on that, especially as they get more involved and more serious into this. You can't understand how devastating it was for me to be injured and realize if I had just simply had somebody tell me no, while I certainly would have been mad about the fact that I didn't get to do the thing I loved most on a baseball field, I also would have understood they were trying to protect me, and I probably could have prevented a very serious arm injury that frankly is reserved for adults for the most part. I don't know another kid that I played baseball with that tore their rotator cuff in high school. It's just not a common thing. And sometimes it can be as simple as overuse. And that's what happened to me. So cautionary tale, don't just throw them to the wolves and expect that all of the coaches have their best interests in mind. Sometimes coaches can have selfish ambitions too. And they might say, I am okay with overusing this particular kid because they're one of the best players on the team and I want us to go win that championship, right? Coaches are flawed humans too. So please don't rely too much on their insights on this. Do your research, understand the risks associated, especially around injury for younger kids and even specialization within sports. I've heard a lot of science out there recently that talks about kids specializing in one sport year round, let's say playing basketball, 9 months out of the year. They tend to, as they get older, they tend to be the most skilled and most ready players for things like college basketball or even professional basketball at some point. But they also tend to have these kind of redundant injuries that you see across a lot of kids that have done the same thing, which is they're using the same muscles, they're putting the same strain on the same ligaments, and all of the things that are this repetitive motion that they're going through can have a cumulative effect over time. So just be mindful of that as kind of a cautionary tale that whether it's specializing too much in one sport or just simply playing too much and not giving your body the proper time to rest, especially in your developmental years, it can be extremely detrimental. And in some cases, like my own, stop any hope you have of progressing beyond maybe just a high school athletic career. All right. Well, here we are. that's the end of episode 4. It's been a whole lot of fun talking about this and thinking about it, not just through the lens of my 10-year-old self, but now my own 10-year-old son's self and how he views these things. We're getting ready to go to his next football game tomorrow. I'm super excited about it. He had a great first week of the season. And it's just something that gives me so much joy to watch my son enjoy the things that I enjoyed growing up. So parents out there, I hope you found some value in this discussion about the importance of youth sports, and not so much the rules or the way they're played, but why they should be played and why your kids can actually stand to develop from that. So as per usual, going to put a couple just quick plugs out there. Still on TikTok. I've got this podcast is going to be going up on YouTube. I did the first video version last week. If you saw that, please provide me feedback on anything you've seen there. Again, this is a new space for me. So I'm trying my best, doing everything that I can in between all of the other life that's going on. But I'd love to hear feedback, positive, negative, whatever. Just let me know how things are going. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. If you could follow me both those places, and really everywhere I'm on socials, it would be really meaningful and help me out a lot as an emerging creator and someone that's really trying to build something like this from the ground up. So at Learn Sports Ball, again, no surprise to anybody that's been listening to the show. And finally, if you want to support me financially, please don't feel obliged to, but Patreon is really the best way to do that for me right now. It's patreon.com at Learn Sports Ball, same place as everything else. But you can find me there, and there is a membership option there that is, I think, $5 a month is what I set it up for. If you are actively engaging in the content and you enjoy what you're hearing, that's a meaningful way to help support this, because while I have done my best to keep this at low overhead for the initial startup, there are still some monthly costs that are associated with this, and at least breaking even at some point would be nice. Even if this never becomes the next big thing, that's okay. I'm really having a lot of fun talking through this with you guys. With that, a couple things to look ahead forward to. NFL season is about to start up. So in a couple of weeks of time, we'll be talking a lot of football. Really excited about that starting up for us again. Still a lot of good content for us to go through. And I've just got so many ideas and so many things that I want to throw out there. But if you have anything in particular that you'd like to hear about, please comment if you're watching on YouTube. So again, my name is Austin Goss. I am the host of the Learn Sports Ball show and the mastermind behind this brand. I appreciate your time. That in and of itself is enough support for me. But if you could share this with your friends, get that out there, start spreading the word about this. I'm going to continue to do weekly episodes for as long as I have it in me. So thank you so much again for your time. I hope you have a great weekend and keep sports balling.